Okay, now we will have our Living with AI panel. Ian Ingram is back. He is the founder and CEO of Neuroven AI Consulting, a student and a new father. Riding on little sleep. Passionate educator already and advocate for the safe deployment of AI technologies. He founded Neuroven to meet the rapidly increasing need for AI literacy and its strategic application in business. Ian believes we are at an unprecedented inflection point, which we've talked about a bit, and that the future is indeed ours to change, as Heather just mentioned in the context of human trafficking. AI technology is still in its infancy, but it's evolving at a rate that entire industries cannot keep up with. It's imperative that we have already started the conversation and that we keep it going right now, even Marta on Saturday. Representative Pam Marsh, now in her 5th term representing House District 5 in southern Jackson County, champions statewide housing policy as chair of the House Committee on Housing and Homelessness. She also serves on committees for climate, energy and environmental and agriculture, land use, water, and natural resources. Her legislative focus includes clean energy, wildfire recovery, near and dear to my heart being an Angeleno in Southern California, broadband expansion, and housing solutions. Thor Muller is a lover of innovation, an AI strategist, and serial entrepreneur at the intersection of AI, startups, and global impact. He's the entrepreneur in residence at Mach 49, where he helps launch disruptive ventures. He's also the co-founder of the Rogue Valley AI Lab, a hub for AI research and development in Southern Oregon. He's also a New York Times best-selling author on innovation and serendipity in business.
Well done.
And once again, Teighe Thorsen, who is here with her parents today. Teighe is a media innovator and digital storyteller who helps mission-driven organizations, the heroes of humanity's story, on their quests to create a better world. Teighe equips change makers with the tools, strategies, and content they need to complete their missions while staying true to their values. With her AI as a partner, not a replacement, training program, she teaches organizations to integrate AI into their creative and marketing workflows. Okay, so let's just jump in again with our traditional softball questions. I mentioned yesterday about the Wright brothers and the Wright sister and how they were convinced that aviation would end warfare because you could see what the opposing armies were doing. They just didn't anticipate dropping stuff on them. So tools are agnostic. And AI is a tool, perhaps one of the most powerful tools. So how can we try to anticipate and mitigate the unforeseen risks that AI poses? We've touched upon this and nibbled at it from different points of view, but I'd like to come back at it again. So what kind of guardrails can we put in place so that AI works for us and we don't work for AI? Teighe, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to jump right into the strong opinion. AI is happening right now. You know, it's helping us right now. It is also harming us right now. And although I think that it is a fun exercise to future project where AI is going to go, we really need to be dealing with what's happening right now. And I think that if we do that, if we make that our focus, we'll end up putting in the safeguards for some of the stuff that is unforeseen. We don't always need to know what that is. It'll develop over time. But if we make sure that our foundation is good from the start, where we still are, I think we're setting ourselves up for a little bit more success.
Okay. Is this thing on? There it is. I disagree.
We agreed to disagree about something.
No, but I actually disagree.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it's really valuable and critical to explore possible futures so that we incorporate that thinking into our ideas of what's important today. And I say futures because there are many potential futures. We don't know, for two reasons. One, we don't know what's going to happen. And two, we can potentially influence it. And so actually I wanted to go back to the Wright brothers because the Wright brothers apparently didn't anticipate that their planes would be used to drop bombs on people. But that was really a failure of their imagination since we'd been doing that for 100 years with balloons. So this is one theme, is what can we learn from the past as we're stepping into the future. The second thing is that within a few years of the Wright brothers launching their first plane, H.G. Wells wrote a story, actually just Googled this, or I should say I clotted it. It was The War in the Air, published in 1907, just 4 years after Kitty Hawk, and he explored all kinds of implications using aerial combat and dropping bombs. And so this would be the second thing I would say, is that science fiction is an incredible treasure trove of explorations about what might happen, good, bad, and ugly. And it's not just the Terminator and the Matrix. There are incredible explorations, some of them quite beautiful, that give us reasons to hope, things to aim for, and more interesting things to fear than merely an AI that wants to kill us all. I can give you examples of these three specific science fiction books that I wanted to mention. One is called A Psalm for the Wild Built. It's about when humans and smart machines go their separate ways. So yeah, what if we actually decide that we don't want to live together anymore? Okay. That's an unexpected one. Another series of books is the Ian Banks Culture series, where we explore what it looks like when we have superintelligence that just kind of runs things and allows us to do what we love. That's something that comes up. But what would that actually look like? Science fiction writers have spent thousands of human hours or years exploring this. We can tap that. A third example is... what was the third example? Hyperion. Yeah, I see some people have read Hyperion, one of the great science fiction novels. Lots of ideas in there, but one of them is what happens if there are multiple superintelligences and they don't agree? Some of them quite aligned with human interests, and some of them hostile to it. So I mention these because when we're exploring futures, we're not left to our own devices. We can stand on the shoulders of giants.
Okay, I guess it's my turn now. I think the story of the Wright brothers is actually a really interesting place to begin this conversation, and fairly instructive, because of two takeaways from that. Number one, the technology was really developed by private interests. There were attempts by the government, the Smithsonian, to fund some projects, and those planes crashed. And frankly, the interests that had funded those efforts walked away and decided the technology couldn't be proved. That was not the case, as the Wright brothers persisted and proved the technology. So that's an important takeaway, is technology is most likely going to be developed in the hands of private interests. But the second really important takeaway from that, and relevant to this question, is that it was the government that actually drove the use of the technology for military purposes. We had World War I coming shortly after the early century development of the technology, and the government put money into making those planes useful for militaristic purposes. After World War I, the short interval, then we had World War II, and we simply continued, the federal government, not only in this country, but internationally, to pour money into private entities that were happy to take the basic technology and develop planes with more and more capacity. So the government brought us to this point. So what's the takeaway for AI? Well, I think the first takeaway is we have to look at the ways that we as state and federal governments choose to use the technology. And the states at least, are trying to get their arms around this. I'm not sure that I can say the same for the federal government at the moment. Nationwide, there were in 2024 450 bills introduced on the subject of AI. Many of those bills did not pass, but it's clear evidence that state legislators are trying to figure out what this monster is and trying to figure out how we use it ourselves and what we can do to regulate the use of it. In my introduction, you heard a long list of things that I'm involved in. You did not hear AI, and that is true for nearly all state legislators. Very few of us understand the technology, understand the capacity of it, but we all know we've got to dive in and figure it out. And the first place that we need to go is to look at how we are using it ourselves to make sure that we are not inadvertently using a technology that discriminates, that results in algorithmic discrimination. In New York State, I think the most significant piece of legislation that I read about for last year was the passage of a bill that requires human review of any decision-making that comes from AI. Because we are still trying to make sure that we're validating that technology, that we're not letting it get out in front of it, and that we, as customers of the technology, aren't inadvertently using it in a way that we will regret woefully in years to come. Ian, it's your turn.
I was collecting my thoughts this entire time because I want to give a very nuanced and broad scope to this, because I believe that this question is more important than we realize. And so I'm actually going to just read from my notes to keep my thoughts collected, because I tend to drift. I agree with most of what everyone has said here, even though there are some internal disagreements here, but I think good points have been made that we should focus on. We don't have a leg to stand on if we try to approach the future without studying the past. We have, in this university, we have access, we have the internet, we have access to our sciences, the humanities, the arts, the best that society has been able to produce. And with these tools, I know that Adam has mentioned a couple times, Micah has alluded to it yesterday, this is a technology that is so disruptive that over the course of the decades is going to fundamentally change society. And that might seem so daunting, so opaque to us that we can't quite look at it. We don't exactly know how to react in this current day, other than focusing on the tools that we have. But I would say we have to use intention to use these tools, to flex these muscles so that we can incorporate the sciences, the humanities, the arts, so that we can make our decisions informed by these facts, these theories, in a much more broad and capable way than we ever have before. And with that intention, we have to decide on the potential future that we want, and collectively, as a community, work toward that. So the challenge is not insurmountable. I mentioned in the learning panel the confidence that I get from being able to learn more efficiently than ever, to take the information that I need out of the infosphere in the format that I need, to turn around and build the tools within minutes or hours to use that information effectively. And we are all capable of that. And I believe very strongly that in order to paddle, we have to collectively do that. Thank you.
Pam, I was happy to see you jump a bit more into the Wright siblings, because there was a fight for aviation, funded with the Smithsonian on one side focusing on the engines, and the Wright brothers and sister being bicycle mechanics, focusing on steering. And there's kind of a metaphorical notion there for us. We have a lot of engines driving AI forward, but it's the steering that we're concerned about. And that's what we hope to develop at forums like this. So we talked about, with Jeff bringing out the notion of perhaps even unintentional collusion. But what are the ethical implications of AI making decisions for us, from shopping and dating to healthcare and legal matters? Basically, outsourcing ethics.
So that we don't want to outsource ethics, right? Nobody wants that.
Are we doing that already passively?
Probably, yeah, 100%. But the calling is to find another way. And I believe that AI gives us a new chance to do that. We're 25 years, 20, maybe 30 years into the commercial internet as we know it. We know a lot of the hazards. Cynthia talked about the extractors and what was the other word?
Corruptors.
And the corruptors. And to some extent, these are outcomes of our system, which incentivizes ruthless pursuit of profits, often at the expense of other things. So, but the thing is, it's not inherently a problem with capitalism. It's a problem with capitalism absent values, absent strong other countervailing concerns other than profits. That's where communities come in. When we engage in local commerce, we know the shopkeepers, they know us. We engage with our local service providers, they're our neighbors. Recontextualizing our use of technology around local context is perhaps the most powerful alternative to the top-down, big tech, outsource your ethics model of technology. I believe we're at the threshold of being able to create a bioregionally specific approach to technology. Some others have talked about open source models. This allows us to, these models allow us to not just connect to a big AI in the sky, but actually to cultivate AIs that are of our time and place, that reflect our values, that allow us to learn and learn together and incorporate those learnings in a way which makes sense to us. So I'll leave it at there for now, but that's really the vision that we have with the Rogue Valley AI Lab, is creating that alternative and really putting the ethical question front and center to our use of AI. It's not technology, not technology. It's what kind of technology and what agency do we have in it.
I would agree with Loki over here. I think that we need to remember that it wasn't the Wright brothers who dropped the bombs, but it's warfare is not the fault of airplanes. And what people do with AI is not the fault of AI. It's something we need to recognize that we have responsibility over. We are responsible for what we create and what we do with it. So I think that we're in a space right now of having to reevaluate what is reasonable to expect from us in regards to responsibility. There's a lot of, I for one, I cannot handle more responsibility. But I don't know if I get to have that choice right now. I am privileged to be educated. I am in technology in an early part of a revolution. It is my responsibility to educate myself about this, to influence regulation as best I can with my knowledge. And I think that that is an attitude that I would love to see adopted by more people, a proactive attitude that, that it is a facet of the luxury of being able to use these cool tools that also requires, the effort of some responsibility.
I think the way that we avoid allowing ethical decisions to slip out of our hands is to not step into the decision making. And we really have to engage at this moment in every opportunity for conscious decision making. That's why there were 450 bills introduced across the country. last year. Those bills address three big areas, including consumer protection and transparency, because there's quite an understanding that if we don't corral the use of the data, that this could really result in essentially redlining in many cases, decisions that are promulgated on computer choices, AI choices, and not ones that reflect our values. The second big area was deepfakes. We know there are computer-generated videos, computer imagery, especially sexually explicit images. And also in that deepfake category is elections and political messaging. Not surprisingly, people who are elected officials are particularly concerned about the use of AI to distort campaigning. And the third area, again, was that government use, trying to make sure that we have a heightened sensitivity to how we incorporate the technology in our own practices. Here in Oregon, let me just tell you about a couple things that we've done. First, last year, the governor put together an advisory council that was required to look, again, at those questions of how we use AI internally. There was a significant report generated from that. You can find it online, or I can direct you to it. And it recommends, among other things, that we have a chief AI officer and a chief data privacy officer. We also have a bill pending in this session. One of my colleagues has put it forward, Rep. Wynn. I'm a sponsor of the bill, House Bill 3592, which would install a permanent state commission with the assignment to overlook AI, to look at our own use, to try to understand how the technology may be assisting or perverting decision-making. Having said all of that, do I have a high degree of confidence that regulatory agencies can actually do this job of regulating AI? I don't. We've seen many other examples of that where the technology slips into its own universe of use. And I would point to social media as sort of a front and center example of that. Regulating technology and trying to install appropriate ethics is going to be the job of everybody in this room, particularly of our educational institutions and of the people who are promulgating and installing the technology.
Paul, you were right. I do have a newborn, and I got about 4 hours of sleep. So I'm going to try and stumble my way through two half thoughts and bring them together satisfyingly. So you'll have to let me know if I do that. But if we could take a snapshot of the work that is being done in the Rogue Valley right now, I would say that there is a not insignificant amount of work that is not being done that we wish could be done. We've talked about work efficiencies, how if we get 30% more of ourselves, 30% efficiency gain or productivity gain, that would just be spent doing more work. And I would say, I think a more prudent, as far as this, taking the opportunity, now that the Rogue Valley community is kind of here, to speak to that, that means that it's cheaper now to do the work that is not being done in the community for our neighbors, for our ecosystem, for wildfire relief, community projects. I would say that using AI, again, with intention collectively toward some of these moral obligations that might not fit so neatly into today's capitalist landscape, let's say, we now have the ability to look at the roadblocks to serving our ecosystem and our community, the monetary roadblocks, the labor roadblocks, in different ways. Let's reapproach collectively how we can use these tools to do more than ever before on the things that matter. And if we can exemplify, as the Rogue Valley, as Ashland, if we can exemplify the coming together and the educating of ourselves on the limits of the capabilities of these tools and what we are capable of with them, we can have a more poignant voice at the table nationally to be taking part in the conversation at the level of government as well. So.
You did well.
Thank God.
I want to stick with this for a bit because I think this is really where the rubber meets the road. So let's say I have a health condition and Meta has just rolled out a new free healthcare diagnosis tool. And I use that. And instead of the old days when you had a bunion on your foot and you go on Google and it tells you you've got leukemia, it guides you through a curated process. You can upload some of your medical records, and it gives me a great diagnosis. And it gives me steps to do, things to ask my primary care physician, et cetera. That's a tremendous benefit for me, right? I mean, we've all lived through not having access, not having health care, not having ready access to healthcare professionals, and now we could have it right away. Do I care, first, that I have given it unprecedented HIPAA-type information about me, which can and likely will be used against me in the future for employment? So that's one issue, my surrendering of the last vestiges of my personal privacy. But the other one is, okay, I've gotten a great benefit from this. How much do I really care that I've fed the corruptors and exploiters as opposed to going open source? There may well be, as Adam pointed out and Teighe reiterated, open source options. But I'm busy. Yeah. I have this health situation. My friend said Meta works. I don't really care who's behind it. How do we get past the apathy when we have a clear benefit from the corruptors?
Can I start this one? There's two sides to the same coin, and I think it's very useful when we can have a framework by which we operate that takes into account what we wish would happen, and in practice, using those same morals or same actions, we are more productive. And when it comes to, one, like I've been saying, coming together as a community, AI doesn't know, and I think Heather says this in so many words quite a bit, AI doesn't, it has the capability to answer questions, but it's on the user, it's on the human being to ask the right questions, because AI doesn't know what we need. Even though we say, I have a medical issue, we need to be specific. We have to say, we can take a picture of the ailment and maybe upload it. But that data, going down from the kind of abstract of what I'm implying, that the community knows what the community needs, and AI can be used, the community can collectively ask the question and get the answer, that's a hypothesis, from AI for the community. Going right back down into the very, very practical of data practices. There are open source, there's a framework called retrieval augmented generation. There are ways in which we can kind of in one spot put all of the data that AI doesn't have knowledge of in its pre-training. It hasn't been trained on. Whether that's our HIPAA data, our situationally specific data, our business practices, our specific bioregional community makeup, or just what day it is and what action we would like to take that very day. AI doesn't know those things, even though it has information inside of it that can help us. So if we understand RAG is retrieval augmented generation, if we understand ways to protect our data, to have a firewall or a moat around that data, use it locally with an open source model. That way we can keep everything in-house for the community. That's one option. And we don't have to figure that out alone. I mentioned some words, and you don't have to know the code that needs to be written in order to implement that. But it does need your data. It doesn't need your context, because how are we going to meet your needs if it doesn't have your context? And so it's a group effort. Yeah.
I have a thought on that. So going back to recent history, maybe I should have answered this in the first question. During the data revolution, it happened really felt very sudden for a lot of people. regulation was very slow, and as a result, our market sort of defaulted to the folks that were able to make money off of that data. And that isn't always to the benefit of the rest of everyone else. The result is that now we are entrenched in a system in which we are expected to give data. It's no longer something that we can bargain. If you want to even exist in the online world right now, you have to accept that you are just you're going to have to give your data. Any free service that you use is not free. You are paying with your data. Your data is out there. It's hemorrhaging from you, and it's a bit of a sticky situation to be in. And unfortunately, a lot of that data has helped to train AI. But I do think that we still have an opportunity to have control over our data going forward. We might not be able to get our data back that's already out there. I don't know if that's possible, but we still have the opportunity to make some kinds of shifts towards having our data, in a decentralized vault. I don't know if that's the answer, but there are ways in which the value of what is known about us can belong to us going forward. And I think that's something that's worth exploring when it comes to the ethical use of that data. I think it would be great if my data information lived in a vault on my phone, and anytime an app asked me for a piece of information, and I'm like, yeah, sure, you can know where I am, it gives me a tiny bit of money. Data is kind of like currency. It has a value, and we're not being paid for it, but someone else is making a lot of money off of it. To me, that's a big ethical issue.
It's kind of like a personal information zero knowledge proof, which is a cryptographic term, where if we could have it so that we are not hemorrhaging our data, but divulging data only as much insofar as to get a desired result and not disclosing more and only disclosing it for a certain period of time.
Precisely, yes.
Yeah, and to some extent, we're really anchored on the models we have today. Like, we go to platforms, we use platforms, they're free, therefore we have this problem of our data leakage. But I do think that we have to kind of look to where things are going. And this is back to science fiction, right? What are the different scenarios where we might end up? We might end up in a more authoritarian world where there's more surveillance. We might end up in a world where our AIs are personal AIs, and we're not actually leaking data because they're doing our information seeking, and they're facilitating data hygiene on our behalf. And there's lots of other scenarios, and there's technical underpinnings for all of them. But I do think that there is this really core problem, which I just call the tyranny of convenience.
Yeah.
This is what you were getting at, right? That it's when it's easier to do the wrong thing than the right thing, then given how time-strapped most of us are, even if you start with good intentions. I remember when we started seeing a lot of the cookie options, like accept all cookies, deny cookies. If you deny cookies, you have to go to another overlay. And at first, after I read this wonderful book called Surveillance Capitalism, which explains how toxic all this is, I was really good citizen for about a month. And I will say, at the time I was living in Amsterdam, which is in Europe, and they have a very strict control system called GDPR there, and that's what started this move to putting up the cookie allowance, and it was very well intentioned. And Pam, this might be something you might want to respond to. It was well-intentioned policy that eventually became, for many purposes, kind of pointless because people just click through those modal overlays on the websites without thinking about them, and it became just overhead for populations of people, as opposed to something which led to a lot of the outcomes that were expected. Now, it's had some good outcomes. Like the European Union can sue these companies and try to make them better citizens. So, having said that, there are a lot of challenges of enacting controls that will protect us. So, we are kind of on our own to navigate this in the meantime. How do we do that? I mean, I don't have an answer here because, well, okay, actually, I do have one thought. I wrote this down. So we have the tyranny of convenience, which is that it's harder to do the right thing than the wrong thing. But AI itself might be the way out of this, because now if I can, in the example I gave before, if I have an AI that's negotiating on my behalf, that's facilitating my interaction with these sites, and it's my AI, it's not even in the cloud, it's on my device, then maybe the cost of doing the right thing could start to get closer to the convenient thing, the formerly convenient thing. Yeah.
I must say it's quite wonderful to sit here and listen to these little morsels of optimism, because I have to say, for myself, I'm not particularly optimistic that human beings are going to lead decision-making with ethical choices. If you look, frankly, at what's happening at the federal level of government right now, we are seeing destruction of a lot of systems and a lot of people's lives, and very little pushback on that. On a very local level, if we talk about technology, what do I have right beside myself? A phone. I'm on Facebook. I'm pretty sure Facebook is evil, and I'm also pretty convinced that social media is going to be the downfall of democracy. But I have a Facebook site, and I'll probably post about this event when I get home, because I haven't been able to divorce myself and to make decisions that I think would actually be ultimately and the appropriate ethical decisions. So I think we're in a tough place right now. I think Thor is absolutely right about the tyranny of convenience. We live high energy lives. We are moving through things quickly. We think we need to be able to have access to information and to make decisions at a rapid pace, and we forget all of the consequences down the line until your phone is showing you advertisements for all the things that you spoke about in a conversation with your family members 15 minutes ago. That's the world we're a part of, and we are going to have to figure out some way of being so self-aware and some way of having the self-discipline to actually follow through, because it's one thing to understand about Facebook, it's another thing to cut your accounts and start talking to people on the street instead of through social media.
I responded first, but I want to add a little bit to what you said. Talking to people on the street. I'm a very extroverted person. My wife is extremely introverted, and we make a great combination that covers all the bases. But I love this community. I first had a conversation with Professor DeFries about AI, 2022. And I was, at that point, he was the only person I knew who I could talk to about it, other than my brother and my wife. And my wife didn't necessarily want to hear me ramble on about AI. But since then, I've met 30, 40, 50, 60 people in this community who are wonderful conversationalists, add so much to this entire, my apprehension is still here. My fear of the future is still there. The dread is gone because of that social aspect. And that's just me being kind of open and honest about that. But it hasn't been because of how shiny and cool these tools are. I love using AI. I love figuring out some new way of, taking a picture of my Excel spreadsheets instead of typing into them anymore. Like, that's all fun. But really, what is all of this for if it's not for the human-to-human connection with our neighbor? And I think that that can't be understated of just how important that is, because what's the point otherwise? And to the extent that these tools can help make those relationships richer, using these tools with intention so that we are turning away from social media, we do have alternatives and incentives so that it is more convenient, and we've manufactured convenience for a return to our human-to-human relationships. I think that's possible. I think that's a very noble problem, and that's all I will say about that.
Okay. Thor, you mentioned multiple superintelligences, and I'm glad you did, because I think there's a tendency to think of AI as this monolithic block, a unitary Skynet. But there will be many, many AIs. We'll have our own personal AIs, I believe. So let's look forward 5 years from now. In terms of preventing our data leakage and getting the best rate on a flight, et cetera, how is this a democratizer? Will this level the playing field? Open source AI that we own, that reports to us and hopefully isn't doing obfuscated reward hacking and hiding things from us, but our own AI, can that effectively negotiate, parlay, compete with the big boys' AI? Do we have a chance that way, whereas we don't right now? Because it's very asynchronous now, the power, right? Large companies and individuals. Is AI potentially something that could level that playing field when it's used by us for us?
Yes.
Next question.
Clearly, there are boundless ways in which AI can be used. Whether or not it is used that way is, I think, that's the question. Whether or not we're able to get it into use that way. I mean, there's a lot of things that block progress towards stuff that's very helpful for humanity, in a lot of different areas that range from obviously regulation, which is what we've been talking about, but also just the climate of people's perspectives. So whether or not something that is a cool ideal can actually occur is challenging to predict. I do think that we are entering into a stage of universal knowledge. I was explaining last night that you can get a research paper written in another language, and you can have it translated for you, and then you can have the research paper summarized and also expounded on, and you can have help with coming up with different ways of looking at it. I mean, it's remarkable how many takeaways you can get from a research paper written in another language that you did not have access to before. So our access to knowledge has just gone through a huge, huge transformation. And not everybody is using it that way, but I guarantee you pretty soon everybody will be. And there are tricky parts about this, like what happens when AI starts to learn off of things AI makes, right? Because we have issues with stuff like synthetic. Are you familiar with the term synthetic content flooding? Which is basically when a subject matter is hot right now, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of research papers show up that sound really plausible, but they're not real. They are AI.
That's called TikTok.
I mean, yeah, it happens in all the mediums. Product reviews on Amazon, that's synthetic content flooding. There's a bunch of different ways that this can happen, and it's happening. We're experiencing it right now, even if we don't always recognize it. So there how universal knowledge is going to shape up, I'm not really sure. But I do think right now what we have access to that we didn't have access to before is going to boost us into a place that I think may better equip us to be able to answer these kinds of questions. And I feel hopeful about it. I know that wasn't a full answer to your question, but I feel hopeful about it.
Interesting. Have any of you heard of the idea of the jagged edge? Okay, this is an idea from Ethan Mollick, who recognized a couple years ago that AI, if you asked ChatGPT to give you a synthesis of medieval history with modern literature, and it would be able to do this, like these remarkable feats that are far beyond what a human could do in split seconds. But then in other ways, let's say counting the number of R's in strawberry, it couldn't do it. And so the idea being that we're getting used to this idea that there's this mismatch between some capabilities that are superhuman and others that are subhuman. And so I think we can also look at the jagged edge as the impact on society. So in some parts of the economy, for instance, software programming, we're AI is able to produce 90+% of the code at advanced levels, and so that's having a remarkable effect on software today, and we're just getting started. In other areas, perhaps agricultural production, we have yet to see any kind of major impact. I don't know if that's true, but that's the impact. So you can see how when we look forward 5 years to your question, it's that jagged edge will not have gone away. To Marta's earlier point, there are so many fundamentally human system level issues that are going to be slow to change or resistant to change. That's going to be sitting alongside those systems, many of which might be governmental, but maybe not. But right alongside areas like software development that are blazing ahead into some super intelligence explosion. So we have to get really comfortable with that cognitive dissonance between things which are far in the future, like today, and things which feel completely unchanged from 20 years ago. So that was the first thought. Secondly, the question is the future a utopia or a dystopia? How many think the future's utopia? Okay, a few. How many think it's a dystopia? Okay, most of you aren't sure, which is, of course, the right answer. The answer is yes. Right. The answer is yes. It will have utopias and dystopias. Why? Because it already does. I spent time in Northern Europe, as I mentioned, and those countries are basically well-run utopias for the people who live there. And for some people who live in North Korea, that's a utopia. But that's a dystopia to most of us. So there's something both subjective about these things, but also just the benefits of technology are uneven. So I think a lot about this, because our imagination is that this technology is leading us to an outcome. But of course, that's not going to be the case. Even if we have a single superintelligence that wants to keep humans in some state of thriving, it would probably facilitate many different cultures and many different systems that would have suspicion of each other, because that's how humans are.
So the introductory comments around the prospect that all of us would have our own individual AI sent me into a momentary little moment of panic, because what I hear when I think about that is the potential for significant widening of economic, social, and cultural disparities that already exist, depending on who has technology, who knows how to harness it, who knows how to use it in a productive way, and who is simply left behind. And I think this should be an enormous concern for all of us going into this phase.
Yeah.
I told you I don't work much in AI, but I work a lot in broadband, sort of one step back. I passed probably 6 or 8 pieces of legislation in the past 10 years, including setting up the state broadband office, getting us ready for the federal money that has come our way for broadband expansion. But remember, a significant number of Oregonians and Americans don't even have access to the internet, much less know anything about AI. They don't have a pad. They may have a phone. They may not have the skills to use this. I was thinking about this week when Social Security announced, if you were paying attention, that you can't you're not going to be able to call up Social Security and get registered anymore. You have to go on the internet and do this. So this is not an easy process, I know, because I set this up for my mom and I had to use my email. And then when I had to apply for Social Security, you can't do it through the same email. You got to go to a different email. You got to set up all these systems unique to the user. We are creating barriers to anyone who cannot use technology. Those already exist. And as we face this prospect of AI, we have to think deeply about how we are going to approach that so that we do not create incredible crevasses between those who can and those who are simply left out.
A brief vignette, just so that we have some numbers in our heads, what we're talking about when we say open source. I did a quick back of the envelope ChatGPT question as people were talking to give me a table How many heard of DeepSeek? Was in the news. Wow. How many have heard of Gemma 3? A lot fewer. Didn't make the news quite as much. In order to run DeepSeek locally, this Chinese model is very competent, very, very smart, and you can open source it. And so that means that you can download it locally, but you need a certain amount of compute to run it. And to run it at maximum intelligence, let's say, would take 16 of NVIDIA's A100 GPUs. Ooh. That is about $400,000 of compute that you would need to purchase and stick in your garage and in order to run it. But you would be able to ask a very competent model questions, give it all your data, and you wouldn't need to hook it up to the internet. You can sacrifice some of the intelligence for smaller versions of that model. So you might be able to get a right answer, let's say 80 times out of 85 questions. That's a bad ratio, but I'm not a math student. 80 times out of 85 questions, it gives you the right answer. And then 5% of the time, it gives you a wrong answer. These are just abstract numbers. You might be able to sacrifice it to where it gives you a wrong answer 10 times instead of 5 times by cutting its intelligence in half, and maybe 20 times. So depending on the work that you're doing, you might be able to have an open source model for $1,600 that gives you the right answer most of the time. And so you wouldn't want to put this into a decision-making process that affected human lives or affected monetary resources, but it might be good enough to build tools for you to interact with or to do research, and then you can verify it and take that extra step. But if you're automating, I wouldn't say so. Gemma 3, at the same slightly less, but essentially the same level of capability at that $400,000 price point, costs $25,000. And that is the level at which AI open source models are improving. So DeepSeek came out around January. Gemma was around late February, maybe first week of March. And that's already, what is 25,000 divided by 400,000? It's considerably less. And that's running it at full intelligence. So you can think maybe for a very, very cheap GPU, maybe the cheapest GPU, I could get a reasonable model that I could keep all of my information on that I could play around with, and it would be open source. So just to have some numbers out there, again, this is assuming that ChatGPT gave me the numbers correctly. I hit the browse web button, so it cited its sources, but just so that we have a little bit more context of what we're talking about when we say open source.
Mm-hmm.
The question was, what's a GPU?
The question was, what's a GPU? That is a graphics processing unit, and it is a special type of processor that handles many, many, many mathematical operations in parallel so that it can handle the compute required to run these very, very intelligent machines that a CPU would not be able to do.
Okay, I want to jump ahead to a question from our forum, which will start at 3 o'clock, and this harkens back to something that Pam mentioned. What will happen to the significant proportion of the population that cannot or will not participate in an AI economy?
What time scale?
Today.
Oh, today.
5 years. Take your pick.
I mean, to me, I think somebody else articulated this. I think we spent the last 100 years turning ourselves into machines, essentially sitting down on a chair like this, going like this all day long. Like if you're in knowledge work, this is what it looks like. This is not an evolved human form in nature, right? This is the opposite of that.
It looks kind of like an organ grinder monkey.
Exactly, right? We over-reward people for doing symbolic, logical things in assembly line like processes, and because the economy values that kind of work. And we're freaking out now because AIs might take that work. But what if it does? And it will. It means that humans will be valued in the system to the extent they have to participate in that system for doing the things which are uniquely human. that are leveraging our unique genius. I'm just taking from a purely economic perspective. That's the inevitable outcome. It might get to the point where most of the economy is running without the requirement for that kind of human involvement, in which case we have to completely rehaul the socioeconomic system. I mean, I personally believe that's inevitable. I don't know what time scale, though. That might be 20 years, it might be 100 years. But this stuff's so fundamental to the logic of the economic system that we have now that we have to revisit the basics. But to be more concrete, in the next 0 to 5 years, it really depends on what field you're in. Like, there's a lot of spaces that are just not. One way of thinking about this is certain kinds of things have a high return on cognitive processes, right? So something like software development or data analytics. The primary thing that's what you're doing is symbolic reasoning of various kinds. And so those things are going to get disrupted. So if you're not using AI in those fields, you probably can't compete. I always think about, what's the old legend of the lumberjack?
Paul Bunyan?
Was it Paul Bunyan? And he had to compete with somebody with a... John Henry. John Henry, yeah, exactly. He thought that he was the best lumberjack in the world with an axe. But there was a point where he couldn't compete with a mediocre lumberjack with a chainsaw. So we're in those fields. I don't know how you can persist for long, but there are many fields that are resistant to that for some time.
I can really only speak to the field that I'm in, which is it's in creativity. My background is in digital animation, and I work, creating campaign content. And so the folks that I talk to about this, of course, as soon as we were seeing amazing videos generated with AI and amazing images generated with AI on mass scale, all of my peers that I talked to in these forums were all going, well, that's it, I'm out. Like, why even try? But here's the thing, and this has been my experience so far. I like being creative. It's fun. And also, I'm really good at it. And so far, AI has not been able to replicate that. So I was talking to someone relatively recently about the training program that I have for organizations to teach them how to bring AI into their creative workflow. And they said to me, well, won't they not hire you for the campaigns anymore if they know how to do it themselves? They will. They only hire me for like 2 major campaigns a year or something along those lines, right? And then for the rest of the year, they have all this campaign content that they have to create, and they don't always have the team for that. You're looking at people that, where the team is like a marketing director and 1 graphic designer, and if they're lucky, an intern. So these are people who are wearing multiple hats, do not have the time, and they have to create compelling content that gets people who cannot pay for gas to donate to the dwindling blue whale population. That is an enormous task that AI can be super helpful with, but they will never be able to replicate what I do. That's why they hire me. My brain, so I have an AI agent that I have trained to speak like me. It knows everything about me. It has my entire work history. I have worked with probably hundreds of brands at this point, and it knows all of those details, has all of that information, and honestly, it is a little bit scary. When I talk to it, I'm like, wow, that really sounded like me.
Do you have it on your phone? Can you talk to it right now?
No, it's on my PC. Yeah. but it's really weird. Shoot, I lost myself. So I have this trained, right? But it cannot produce the genius that I produce. It just can't. It can help me. It certainly gets me a lot further. I tell you what, the quality of my work has improved exponentially since adopting AI into my workflow, but it still cannot do what I do. And so I think that I think that for my colleagues in my career, that although I really, really encourage them to definitely bring AI into their workflow, don't be afraid of AI in that way. You know, it's not human. Human minds are remarkable, and we are able to make connections that AI hasn't quite even gotten to that point yet. We just think different. We think we're meat, you know. But it's important to recognize that we are different, and so as a result, we produce different results, and that is difficult to replicate. It can come close, certainly, but it's difficult to replicate, and also we're not going to want it to. We're going to want to make stuff. We are naturally creative as just a species. We can't even help ourselves, you know. Like, what are you if suddenly AI took away some of your work? What do you think you'd do? Just sit on a couch somewhere? I mean, probably maybe for like a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months for the novelty of it. But you would get bored. You would have to get up and go do something. You would want to go do something. You would want to go create something. You would want to, you know, find some value. So I think that. Yes, there will be people who will lose their jobs because of AI. It is the nature of huge technological shifts like this. There will be, and a large part of that is just because the industry will reconstruct itself around the new tools, right? But I think that when it comes to human ingenuity and human genius and human creativity, there is always room for us in this picture. And I think that that's you know, something worth remembering, that you are more valuable than the AI. So there you have it.
That speaks to another one of the questions we got for the forum, which is, given the speed of advancement in AI and emerging technologies, can you name one job, you had one job, that can't be replaced by AI, robotics, or a combination of the both of them? We just heard one.
Yeah. Do you want me to pick a specific?
No, I think you just did a very good one.
Okay.
You pre-answered the question. So, you know, think about like creative writing. Right? You have people like Stephen King. We've heard his name bandied around. The poster child for the seat of the pants writing method. He's got a very unique voice. And you could conceivably load all of his books in and write another book, but I think it wouldn't pass that uncanny valley test. It wouldn't be quite right. So people that have a very unique voice will likely not be displaced by AI. The people who will be displaced and are being displaced now are sort of in the middle. They're sort of capable folks.
Yeah, mediocre.
Sorry?
The median.
The median, yes. So, but who will they be replaced by? People who couldn't have done it before, but are now using AI. Is that a net loss, a net gain? I don't know.
But there are some fields, I just keep going back to this one research where they looked at diagnosis, medical diagnosis, and they compared the AI, some of you are nodding, you saw this, the AI diagnoses, the doctors alone diagnosis, and the doctors plus AI diagnosis. And the conventional wisdom in this field is AI plus doctor would outcompete. Get the best of both worlds. But in fact, from a diagnostics perspective, the AI alone outcompeted all the other categories. And so, yeah, it's going to depend on the category, and sometimes it might surprise us. Of course, that's a very data and objective outcome kind of scenario. The subjective things, the artistic, the expressive, the just like what if I'm an AI and I want to make products that will sell to humans, I probably want to ask a human what they want, not another AI pretending to be a human. So if nothing else, to the extent that we're the market, we still have a voice in it.
Yes, please.
So on a different topic, I just want to put this on the table because I know we're nearing the end of our time. And I believe that there's an enormous existential question in terms of the environmental impacts of AI. We are seeing the proliferation of data centers, and the data centers now are going to be on an accelerated schedule in order to accommodate AI. From 2019 to 2024, up in the northern part of the state, PGE, which is the major electric utility, had an increased demand equivalent to 400,000 more people, but only 60,000 people actually moved to that area. If we do not get control of this, we have no idea where the energy is going to come from. We are right now, as a state, trying to pursue our renewable electricity goals. At the same time, we are seeing this tsunami of energy demand coming from the tech sector, the data centers that are going to be accommodating AI. What does that mean? It means unless we can figure this out with new technology, we are going to see an increased pressure to start using fossil fuels nationally. You're already seeing policy that supports that. Here in the state, we are holding the line. But somehow, these giant creatures will need to be fed. And there is the consequences of this for what we are seeing, the tumult that we know exists within the climate, and the things that we know we need to do in order to corral climate change in any way are really front and center right here. I want to just note on that topic, since I'm a legislator and I pitch my bills, I have a bill that you might be interested in this realm. It's a bill that would require large data centers to simply pay the costs of their own energy provision, because if we don't corral that, the costs of providing transmission and distribution and new facilities for data centers will be shifted on to all of you sitting in this room, the consumers who are paying your bills. The very least we need to do is to make these entities pay for their own power. That bill is House Bill 3546, also known as the Power Act, if anybody is interested.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Pam. That brings us to a close. We're going to take a 15-minute break. Then we're going to have all the Avengers assemble, all the panelists come up for the community forum. Great panel, folks. We've learned to ask the right questions, right? We're not deciding things yet. We're still asking better questions. We have to have human reviews and leave no one behind. And if we can avoid succumbing to the tyranny of convenience, we can hopefully prevent our personal data hemorrhaging. Thank you.